Seeing those scars makes people recoil. You look like a monster, I can't have you in my perfect wedding photos. Those were my daughter's words. They cut through me sharper than any blade. The little girl I raised alone, the one I worked myself to exhaustion for, the one I sacrificed everything for, she pronounced that sentence with 3 weeks to go before she walked down the aisle. People say, blood is thicker than water, but what if that very blood is the one throwing stones? My name is Martin Hale. For 36 years I believed unconditional love meant accepting everything, the sulks, the demands, the coldness. I believed sacrifice was a duty and that giving was enough. I was wrong. Then a phone call on a Tuesday night changed everything, not an apology, but a cold verdict. If you're listening before I go on, hit subscribe and drop a comment to tell us where you're tuning in from. Now sit down, take a deep breath, and hear me tell the moment everything fell apart and how a father began to rebuild his life from the ashes. I found myself touching the scars again when Emily called that Thursday evening, fingers tracing the raised strip of skin along my left cheek and neck, a habit I can't seem to quit. 22 years later, I still catch myself doing it, following the permanent reminder of the day I ran into the flames. May 25, 2006. I was supervising a job site when an electrical cabinet exploded. The office container burst into flames. Everyone fled the yard except Javier Morales, 24, newly graduated, someone's son lying unconscious beneath a fallen beam. I ran in and pulled him out. The ceiling collapsed on me before that. The doctor said second-degree burns. It could have been worse. Emily was only 9 then. She ran to class and proudly showed the newspaper clipping. My dad saved a life. The phone rang. Dad. Emily's voice was different, colder since she'd met Andrew. I tried to sound light. Hey, my little girl, is the wedding all set? A pause. That's why I called. We need to talk about the wedding. I sat down in the armchair, the same armchair I'd sat in helping her with homework for years. What about it? It's about whether you'll be there. I've got a suit ready for you. Nothing fancy. I forced a smile, my insides freezing. Your mother would be proud. Dad, come on, that's the point. Andrew's family is paying for everything, and they have very specific standards for how things should look. I tried to ask, what do you mean? Emily answered, clipped and cold. Your scars will ruin the photos. You shouldn't be there. Those scars make you look damaged, like a monster. You're calling me a monster? I said, each word like a stab. The scars I was tracing, they're not just marks. They're skin pulled tight, calloused, pitted like scales, shining red when the bathroom light catches them. The smell of char still lingers in memory, the metallic tang of dried blood on my tongue. I remembered 9-year-old Emily, eyes bright as she held up that clipping at school. Now those same eyes called me a monster. Emily went on, photographer, videographer, everything has to be perfect on Instagram. Andrew's mother won't accept anyone with scars on their neck. I felt my chest go cold, thinking of the double shifts to pay her tuition, the thrift store clothes, the late nights working overtime, the old Honda I drove to keep a roof over our heads, the time I sewed her collar before she left for school. I didn't argue, tears gathered silently at the corners of my eyes instead. So, what exactly are you suggesting? I asked, voice tight. Andrew and I found a few good assisted living places, Emily said, decisive. We've scheduled a tour this weekend. You mean you want to put your father in a nursing home so he won't embarrass your new family? Don't be dramatic. I tried to stay calm. We just think it's time for a fresh start. You start the next chapter, we start our life. A new beginning, like erasing 29 years of being your father. Her tone was cold and calculated. I looked at the photos on the wall every birthday, every graduation. There I was in each one, my arm around her shoulder, my smile beaming. In those pictures I had always angled myself to hide the scars, tried to keep them out of sight so she wouldn't be ashamed. What had I done to deserve this? You say I'm ugly, that I don't fit your aesthetic, I said, slowly, without a long defense, just the plain images of my life. I worked night shifts to pay your tuition. I sewed your clothes with my own hands. I drove that old Honda so you could buy books. Emily didn't flinch. I'm grateful, but you don't fit the style we want. I think you're something we should hide. My life shattered like a mirror. These scars came from saving a life 22 years ago. No one cares about that anymore. What matters is how you look in the photos, she said, voice as cold as snow. Once more I tried to steady myself, but not to argue. My actions spoke instead of words. My hand tightened into a fist, then loosened one of the flowers on the shelf, toppled and lay broken. Silence. No, Emily, you don't understand, I said, but the words fell into the void she had made. The same small finger that had once traced these scars now pushed me out of her life. I hung up and my world went dark. That night I sat with the glass of whiskey I had been saving for my daughter's wedding toast, my eyes fixed on the photos plastered across the refrigerator. Emily, at 9, beaming, holding up the newspaper clipping that called me a hero. Emily, at 17, hugging me in that awkward teenage way. Emily on graduation day, my arm around her shoulders. Words could not capture how proud I was then. When did I become a monster in her eyes? That question twisted in my chest like a knife. The daughter I raised, the one I sacrificed everything for, had just called me a monster and said I was too ugly to make her happy. The little girl who used to light up showing off the article now only saw an old man covered in scars and cheap clothes driving a cramped Honda. What Emily didn't know was that behind that modest house sat a trove of files. The years I lived frugally, buying small plots of land, piling up investments. It was all tucked away in filing cabinets she never bothered to open. Every penny I'd saved, every lease, every bank statement, all of it meant for her future. It had been. I couldn't sleep. The word monster kept ringing in my head. In the morning I sat among the scattered photos on the kitchen table, looking back over 36 years, and everything looked different. Her 17th birthday I paid for everything, yet I ended up in the kitchen, pouring drinks for guests. Graduation she introduced me merely as my dad, with no story, no explanation. The common thread was right there. I had been blind to it. The phone rang. Emily. Dad, the nursing home has a spot next month. They're doing a tour this weekend. It's scheduled. Next month. They've already made plans. The doorbell rang at noon. Miguel Morales stood on the porch, my friend of 41 years, the man whose nephew Javier first had pulled from the fire. He walked in, looked at the cluttered living room full of photos, and said bluntly, "You look pathetic, Martin. Emily called me. She's worried about your state of mind. She said you hung up and might do something rash." I snapped, "I'm fine. The problem is my daughter." Miguel sat down, his gaze uncompromising. "Martin, when was the last time Emily called just to check on you?" I fell silent. "She still calls. She calls when she needs money, when she needs a favor. When does she call just because she misses her father?" Miguel pushed, his voice pulling back a curtain. I opened my mouth. "When?" Silence. The silence weighed more than any words. "I only wanted to be a good father," I said, my voice small. Miguel answered like a blow to the chest. "No. You didn't buy affection, you bought it. And now you've raised a monster." The words cut like scissors. "When she needed tuition, you paid. When she wanted to study abroad, you sold the car. When a shirt needed mending, you mended it. She got used to having everything. That's not love, Martin, that's a transaction." His words hurt more than Emily's. I whispered, "She used to love me." Miguel replied, gentler but unforgiving, "She used to need you. That's different. You're not the one turned into a monster, you raised it." I looked at the photos again. Years stacked up like evidence. I had been there for every one of them. I had thought hiding the truth about my assets would teach her character, let her learn the value of work before she learned money. I believed that if Emily knew I was wealthy, she'd become spoiled. She became spoiled anyway. She became entitled and ungrateful. Miguel left me with a pile of memories. I sat in the empty room, fingers gripping the edge of a photograph, feeling the roughness of the paper under my nails. The clipping that had lived in my wallet had become a faded memory. I realized something that felt like my heart breaking. I wasn't just a victim of her behavior. I had created the pattern by answering every demand, by patching every lack with money. So what now? A cold thought flashed. If she doesn't know the full truth about me, perhaps it's time she learned what she has never imagined. She asked me to disappear from her life. She'd be even more shocked to learn that what she was trying to throw away was the life I'd built. I sat there a long time, looking at the photos, and for the first time in many years I felt something different. Not remorse, not the consuming loneliness, but a quiet resolve. She had made a fatal mistake, and she was about to face the consequences. After Miguel left, I went upstairs, opened a door Emily had never bothered to notice. It was a spare bedroom lined with filing cabinets. To her, those cabinets were just old paperwork. She had no idea that inside them lay the financial foundation I had quietly built over many years. I took out my leather briefcase, unlatched it, and for the first time in months opened it. Papers were spread across the desk. Deeds, lease agreements, investment statements. Those dry little documents suddenly formed a different portrait of my life. I could see each piece clearly. The duplex I bought in 1997 with my wife's life insurance proceeds. The commercial building I bought in 2008 when people said the neighborhood was dying. The apartment complex I snapped up during the foreclosure crisis in 2014 when no one wanted to buy. 4 properties, all of them rose in value over the years, and all produced steady rental income. Then there were the investment statements, 40 years of systematic saving, a 401k, an IRA, index funds, company stock from when the engineering firm I worked for went public, safe bonds and certificates of deposit. Decades of living below my means, eating simply and shopping at Value Mart, while the portfolio quietly grew. I added the numbers up. Real estate, savings, insurance, policies, my net worth came into view. $5.2 million. I sat in silence, staring at the figure as if it were a newly revealed truth about 28 years of driving that old Honda while the wealth accumulated under the surface. 28 years of letting her think her father just got by, while I prepared an inheritance for the next generation. I picked up the phone and called Samuel Whitmore, the estate lawyer I had used years before. "Martin, good to hear from you," Samuel answered. "I want to change my will completely," I said, short and direct. "You sure? Moves like that are vulnerable to challenge," he warned. "Make it untouchable," I replied, "and draft a video statement explaining my reasons." The next morning I was in Samuel's mahogany-paneled office, the same room where I had once signed away everything to Emily. This time it wasn't an act of hope, it was a decision. "You want to cut Emily out entirely?" Samuel asked as he flipped through the old will. "I will leave the entire estate to the Daughters Opportunity Foundation when I die. But while I'm still alive, I'm going to use this money to build a new life, a life that has no place for my daughter." My voice was cold and final. Samuel cautioned me about acting in anger and the legal risks. I answered plainly, "This is not a moment of anger, this is clarity." I told him about the phone call, about being called a monster, about the ultimatum to put me in a care home, about 36 years of sacrifice met with betrayal. Samuel nodded, professionally. "With an estate of this size, I recommend attaching a recorded statement to head off any litigation." "Do it," I said, "and don't notify anyone extra, she'll find out soon enough." I smiled the same smile Miguel had given me the day before. "Her wedding is in 2 weeks. I'm attending." 2 hours of careful work, fast, precise, uncompromising. By midday the new will had been drafted, signed, and made legally effective. Emily Hale was no longer my heir. When I die, the estate would fund scholarships and vocational programs through the Daughters Opportunity Foundation to help women rebuilding their lives. For now, I would begin living as the man I had quietly become. Stepping out of the lawyer's office, I felt an unfamiliar power. Not just the power of money, but the power to decide my own fate. I had hidden my wealth to teach her the value of work. Now I chose not to let anyone exploit it, not even family. And with $5.2 million, I intended to live differently. I intended to enjoy it. The office door clicked shut, and I stepped out holding something I had hidden for 28 years. Power. Not just money. The power to decide my own life, to live authentically. Emily thought she knew her father. She thought I was the ruffled old man who would bow and accept any scrap of affection she tossed my way. She thought the worst she could do was keep me out of her perfect wedding. She had no idea the man she'd just discarded was about to step out of the shadows and show the world who Martin Hale really island. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to transform. 2 weeks to prepare the final gift for the child who had called me a monster. Everything had to be perfect. 2 weeks later, I was standing in front of the mirror at Riverton's top barber. Marco Leone, the stylist, stepped back to admire his work. The three-way mirror reflected 3 angles of the same face. I barely recognized myself. The silver in my hair had been cut and styled with care. My beard was trimmed to emphasize the scars, not hide them. The burn marks were still there. They would always be there. But now they read more like a badge than a defect. "How do you feel, Martin?" Marco asked. I answered simply, "Today I'm not hiding anymore." Next came the tailor. Italian wool draped like a new suit of armor. A charcoal suit, tailored to the last stitch. No need to flaunt numbers, just the feeling. Stand taller, broaden your shoulders, watch how people look at you differently. I left the shop in a rented BMW. Gone were the familiar rattles of the old Honda. The interior was warm, the engine purred nothing like the drives I used to make to cover everything in that old car. The church parking lot was full of luxury cars. Mercedes, Audis, a few Teslas. The Blakes were not shy about showing their wealth. I parked between a Porsche and a Lexus, exactly where I belonged. I climbed the church steps, feeling eyes on me. A few guests turned to look and murmured. They wondered, who was that well-dressed gentleman? Nobody recognized the shabby man Emily had been ashamed of. I chose a seat in the aisle, visible, not in the back, not in the family section. A place she could not possibly miss me. The procession began. Andrew looked tense at the altar, his tux too flashy. The bridesmaids passed, and then Emily walked in. She was radiant. The dress was everything she'd dreamed of. The flowers fresh, her smile bright. Her eyes swept the room, accepting the compliments. Then they landed on my row. At first she didn't see me. Then a double take, like missing a step. Her face flickered with disorder and surprise, as if something inside her had been shaken. That was the moment I wanted. I smiled and gave a slow, measured wave. No pleading, no apology. Just a deliberate wave so she would register. The pathetic father from before is standing tall now. She steadied herself and continued down the aisle. But I could see her mind racing. Who is that man? Why does he look familiar? Why is he sitting where my father would have sat if he'd had the nerve to show up? I looked at her, not diminished, not contrite. I knew the shock on her face made the 2 weeks of work worthwhile. I knew the wedding photos would capture that instant, the moment of recognition, and I knew the envelope in my jacket pocket was still heavy. She looked at me, but she didn't yet know the worst of it was still inside that envelope. The ceremony went off without a hitch. I listened to the vows, watched Emily and Andrew exchange rings, and applauded politely when they were pronounced husband and wife, just another guest offering congratulations. As people began to leave the service, her eyes found my row. This time, recognition flashed. A flicker of embarrassment, then stunned silence, maybe shame. The perfect wedding photos she'd dreamed of would now include a shot of her looking bewildered. Good. The line of guests gathering in the church foyer to offer their congratulations formed up. I waited until most of them had passed, then stepped forward. Her smile froze when she saw me approaching. "Congratulations, Emily," I said, shaking Andrew's hand first. "You are the groom. I am Martin Hale." Half a second of silence, then I continued, slow and clear. "I am Emily's father." Andrew's eyes widened slightly as he took in my suit and the way I carried myself. This was not the shabby father she had described. She managed, "Dad, you look different." I nodded once. "Yes, I'm different." I put my hand in my pocket and drew out an envelope. Thick cream paper, bold handwriting, the faint smell of glue and ink. I placed the envelope into her hand slowly and deliberately, like delivering a sentence, then stepped back without looking over my shoulder. "A wedding gift from your father," I said, in a calm voice. I kissed her cheek, the cheek she'd probably spent an hour perfecting with makeup, and walked away. She called my name from behind me. I did not turn. I walked out to the parking lot, climbed into the rented BMW, and looked back one last time through the window. She was still standing there, clutching the envelope. I waved once, started the engine, and drove off. By the time she opened the envelope and read the lines inside, I was halfway to the airport. In the church foyer, the chatter and the clink of glasses faded. All sound seemed to contract into silence as she slit the envelope. The paper made a sharp, single rasp. She read, "My dear Emily, when you read these lines, I will be leaving your life forever. Not dead, just free. 22 years ago I earned these scars by running into a blaze to save a man. You once said I was a hero. Today you call those scars disgusting and say I look like a monster. I have lived frugally and worked quietly to save for your future. I bought land when people said the neighborhood was dying. I bought a duplex after a great loss. I collected, invested, and saved for 40 years. I shopped at Value Mart. I drove the old Honda. I forgone comforts so you could have them. When I added it all up, real estate, savings, shares, insurance, the number was $5.2 million. I did not tell you because I wanted you to learn character before money, but the result is that I created someone who is accustomed to receiving, not to giving. You said I didn't fit your style. You were right. I don't belong to a world where appearance matters more than character, so I'll give you what you wanted. A life without the father who embarrasses you. My will has been changed. Every penny of this estate will be left to the Daughters Opportunity Foundation when I die, to fund scholarships and vocational training for women rebuilding their lives. You called me a monster. Congratulations. You will never see me again. My love for you was unconditional. Yours was transactional. I have learned the difference. Goodbye forever, Martin Hale. P.S. You forgot that the monster you're ashamed of is worth more than the Blake family, but you will not get a single cent from it. When she reached the number, the room seemed to hold its breath. The clink of glasses stopped completely. Her eyes widened, her legs buckled, her heart thudding as if it would leap from her chest. Before a tear could fall, her face had already gone pale. Those around her murmured, their expressions shifting from curiosity to horror. Evelyn Blake rushed forward, trembling as she took the paper. Andrew stood frozen, awkward. "Who is that?" Andrew asked, voice tangled with confusion and anger. "You told me your father wasn't suitable for photos, didn't you?" She backed into a quiet corner, clutching the envelope, eyes hollow. Outside, the wedding bustle continued, but for her the world had collapsed. She had just made the decision of her life and lost an inheritance as well. At that moment I was far away. I had left her life not in words, but in action. The story of Martin Hale and his ungrateful child had begun a new chapter. The envelope snapped out of Emily's hand, spun once in the air, and landed like a verdict. All the noise in the foyer seemed to be sucked dry, laughter receded, the music cut off, leaving only the soft crinkle of paper in her hand. Guests' mouths closed. The moment was leaden. She stood frozen. The weight of what she had done crashed down. Her father was not poor. He was wealthy, wealthier than anyone at this reception, and she had just thrown him away like trash. Evelyn bent down, picked up the envelope, and skimmed the contents. Her expression flipped from curiosity to horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Andrew, look at this." Within a few beats, the paper was passing through the Blake family like bad news spreading. Andrew snapped, trying to restrain himself. "You've just turned away a millionaire. Your father is worth nearly $5.2 million, and you called him a pauper." The words cut the air like a knife. Emily stammered, I didn't know." Evelyn snapped back, voice loud. "How did you not know? He lived simply to save for you. How could you not see that?" Andrew exploded next. "And now all of it is going to charity just because you called him a monster." The photographer stepped forward, dryly. "Who's taking a family photo right now? Is there anyone who'll stand with her?" The question was as sharp as an arrow, exposing the empty space she had just created. Emily gave a short, panicked laugh. What family? She tried to move toward the door, her heart plunging. Where is he? Her voice echoed under the scrutinizing gazes. The parking lot was empty. The black BMW was gone, leaving only the heavy gap where it had been. The polished, wealthy, and broken man had left. Emily frantically dialed his number. Disconnected. Texts bounced back undelivered. A new number? None. He had vanished from every trace. Standing in the empty lot, her wedding dress billowing in the breeze, Emily felt the costliest mistake of her life settle over her. $5.2 million. Gone. Forever. And more than money, the man who had quietly stood behind every one of her choices was gone too. She looked back at the image of that man, confident, composed, nothing like the shabby figure she had described to others. She had been too blind, too superficial, too ruthless to see it. Now regret had no remedy. Around her, a few people furtively pulled out phones not to photograph the bride, but to capture the moment the disaster spread. The murmurs rose like waves, eyes sharpened like needles, marking the erasure of a name from an estate and from an identity. Emily stood there, still clutching the envelope, her gaze empty. The BMW was gone. The messages never arrived, and he had disappeared. Forever. 3 months later, I was sitting on my new patio in Sunridge, Arizona, watching the sun spill gold across the ridges of Saguaro Basin. My coffee steamed in the cool morning air, a hush I'd thought I'd forgotten long ago. For the first time in 36 years, my phone no longer rang constantly with Emily's demands. Because Emily didn't have my new number, the house I bought was not the modest place in Riverton anymore. It was a spread with a pool, mountain views, and enough room for weekend barbecues with friends. I paid cash, no mortgage, no ties to the past. Not to show off for freedom. My neighbors here are retired professionals who cherish quiet mornings and respect boundaries. They know nothing of Martin Hale, who once lived small, nor of the daughter who once broke his heart. Here, I'm just Ben, a friendly retired man who did well in real estate and decided to enjoy his golden years under the desert Sunday. My phone buzzed, a message from Tom Reed inviting me to golf tonight. I smiled and replied, "See you at the clubhouse." Simple, no strings attached. Miguel still called to say Emily begged for my address. He was the only one who still had my number. "She calls every day," Miguel said. "She begged me for your number. She wants to apologize," I answered. I told her, "You're where you chose to be, and I'm where I chose to be." The aftermath of the wedding was brutal. The Blake family was stunned to learn Emily had turned away a millionaire. The news spread through their teas and bulletin boards like wildfire. The bride called her wealthy father a monster and lost a $5.2 million estate. Evelyn muttered that Emily married beneath herself. Andrew sat quietly, calculating how much their future would have changed if that money had stayed in the family. That money could have bought a lot of forgiveness, but it was too late. Emily tried every route. Letters to the old address returned, texts undelivered, digging through social media. I had deleted every account. She hired a PI, she combed everywhere. But it isn't easy to catch someone who's erased their tracks, changed numbers, and legally moved an entire life. To her, I was now a ghost. On a Tuesday morning at the golf course, 4 retired friends gathered. Tom, Henry, Miguel, and me. We talked investments, upcoming trips, the things that make life worth living. "Looks like you found a safe way to retire," Henry, a retired surgeon, said. I answered plainly, "I finally understand the difference between being needed and being valued." It wasn't a hollow philosophy, it was a lesson learned in bone and blood. After the round, I drove home thinking about Emily, not with longing or bitterness, but with a cold curiosity. Maybe she was pretending to be fine at the office while carrying the weight of what she'd lost. Staring at her phone, waiting for a call, praying for forgiveness. I didn't take pleasure in her pain. I felt quiet, and that was exactly what I'd been looking for. That evening, sitting by the pool watching the sun sink, the phone rang, an Arizona number, a new friend. I picked up with a genuine smile. This was someone who called because he was a friend, not because he needed money at the last minute. My life now was tidy, simple, honest. No drama, no manipulation, no child treating her father like an ATM. Emily wanted me out of her life, mission accomplished. And I had never felt more at peace. 6 months after the wedding, I stood on a trail in Saguaro Basin, watching dawn light the stoic cactus. Silence so deep it felt sacred, no demands, just the sense of being where I belonged. Laura, my hiking companion and a retired teacher, pointed at a roadrunner that zipped through the bushes. I laughed. 74, and still seeing things for the first time. At 74 years old, I was finally living my real life. My new circle, Laura, Tom, Henry, Sophia, none of them knew Emily. They knew Ben, the man who tells jokes, brings cookies to book club, listens and remembers little things about you. These relationships were healthy. Mutual respect, genuine affection, people who call because they enjoy your company, not because they want something from you. That afternoon I read by the pool. The mail carrier waved. Neighborhood kids shouted, "Hi, Mr. Ben." No calculation, no agenda. I opened my notebook and scribbled. 6 months, living true peace over chaos, respect over manipulation, self-worth over self-sacrifice. In losing Emily, I found myself. I poured a good glass of wine because I could and because I deserved it. Somewhere, back in Riverton, Emily faced the consequences. Divorce papers filed, the whispers still not quiet. Maybe she'll learn, maybe she won't. It's no longer my business. The final lesson: you are not required to tolerate abuse, even from family. Sometimes forgiveness is right. Sometimes walking away is the kinder choice. Self-respect is not selfish, it's sacred. I chose myself. I found freedom. And for me, that was enough. Thank you for following Martin Hale's journey from quiet sacrifice to reclaimed freedom. If this story moved you, subscribe now. Hit like if you empathize, and share the video so someone else might find the courage to set their boundaries. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in Martin's shoes? I'll read every comment, let your voice be heard. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next powerful story, because sometimes the right story at the right time can save a life.